A while back, I made a video comparing the translations of all areas in Hollow Knight Silksong into the 9 languages available in the game, apart from English, and surely nothing would happen that would render it outdated like, I don't know, Team Cherry releasing a patch with updated Chinese translations the day after I uploaded it? Very awesome. Anyway, since I received many comments from people wanting to see more, I started working on a follow-up video. I wasn't sure what to analyze this time, boss names, tool names, skill names, but in the end I figured comparing character names would be the most exciting. Obviously I'm not going over every NPC and boss in the game, I just handpicked 20 something that I thought would be interesting to compare. Like sure, we all love Sherma, but his name in all languages is just Sherma, so there's nothing really to look at here. Once again, I want to mention that I don't speak any of the languages the game offers translations for, with the exception of Japanese, so I asked my audience for help to make sure I get as much right as I can. Thank you to everyone who offered their time. So, let's start with the lady in red herself, our protagonist Hornet. She is a curious case as she is named after a real animal, despite clearly not being that animal. It's like if I called myself Fish. And although Hornet's name is a simple common noun, it was not translated into other languages, and she remains as just Hornet in all localizations of the game. All but one, because in Chinese we have a direct translation, Da Huangfeng, which is literally a hornet. More literally, it's a big wasp, and a wasp is a yellow bee. Gotta love these analytic languages. I also want to take a quick look at the Russian version of the name, Hornet. Russian has these 2 consonants pronounced h and g. In loanwords with h-like sounds, the former is generally reserved for the same harsh h as the Russian letter represents, like the Greek chi. For a softer h, like that of English, Russian traditionally uses g. So you would expect Hornet's name to be Gornet. However, recently using the harsh h in such cases has become more common, and this is one example. Another thing to look at is the vowel in the second syllable. Russian has these 2 letters, one of them is ye and the other e. So the first softens the preceding consonant and the second doesn't. But in many loanwords, the sound e is represented with this letter, and this can't really be predicted from spelling. So just by looking at it, this name should be pronounced Hornet, or if we want to pronounce it as Hornet, we should spell it like this, but this is not the case. We'll see the same thing with several other characters' names, including the next one. Moving on to the game's deuteragonist, let's talk about this bratty menace named Lace. Once again, most languages left the name as is, but Italian and Portuguese were a little more creative. In Italian, her name is Merletta, which comes from the word meaning lace, which is unfortunately masculine, so the ending was changed to a feminine one. It also makes her name end in etta, giving her a befitting diminutive quality. In Portuguese, lace is translated as tecela, most likely originating from the word tecelin, which was modified slightly to look more like a name. It also ends in ella, which, just like in Italian, can form diminutives, and is also a common ending of female names. Finally, let's look at Chinese 类似. On first glance, it looks like a phonetic borrowing, but it's much more than that. It's actually my favorite type of translation called phonosemantic matching. It involves preserving both the meaning and sound of the source word by using elements from the target language that happen to bear resemblance to the original in both aspects. Often the resulting word doesn't even look foreign. In this example, the word is composed of the characters for bud and silk, alluding to the original meaning, and pronounced together sounds like the original English word despite passing as a native Chinese word. I love this level of creativity, although this is not a word made specifically for this character, it's just the actual word for lace in Chinese. Once we obtain the silk spear, we face our first real challenge. Just like my ex-wife, we need to beat her up before she let us ride her. The bellbeast proves a loyal companion throughout the rest of the game. A direct translation was the most popular choice, giving us Glockenbestie in German, Bestia Campana in Italian and Spanish, and Tongyasu in Korean. French and Portuguese used possessive phrases, Bête de cloche and Besta dos sinos, and Russian used an adjectival equivalent for bell, resulting in Kolokolny zvier. In the remaining languages, the creature is referred to as the bellbeast, zhongdao shou in Chinese, and shoumyaku no kemono in Japanese. The Japanese word shoumyaku doesn't exist. It's a neologism made up for the game. It's really cool because it uses the character for veins, since the bellweights are like the veins of the organism Farloom. See how cool you can make your translations if you don't just transcribe the English word? Bellheart. The bellbeast also has an evil twin, or something, that we fight at the start of Act 3, Bell Eater. Here's where things get a little weird. Most English nouns, including agent nouns like eater, can refer to either gender. Most other European languages are less tolerant of such neutrality. Throughout the video, we'll see several characters whose gender is not specified in the original English and whose gender is not consistent across the other languages. In such cases, the names generally default to masculine, as in German Glockenfresser, French Dévoreur de Cloches, and Russian Požiratel Kolakolov. However, in Portuguese, bellbeast is explicitly female, Devoradora de sinos. By the way, there's also an inconsistency because in the French Hunter's Journal, the bells are singular. Should probably unify that. You can also circumvent the gender issue like Italian and Spanish did, with mangia campane and traja campanas literally translating to eats bells or swallows bells, a sort of construction I talked about in my previous video when analyzing the translations of weave nest. Chinese and Japanese make use of agentive suffixes, resulting in shi zhongzhe and kaneo kurau mono, and in Korean we get a bell predator, chung posikja. A much more benign bug we can encounter early on in our adventure is the leader of the Flea caravan, Flea Master Mushka. Just like with the bellbeast, the European languages use one of three strategies: putting two nouns together, as in German Flohmeister Mushka and Italian Mastro Pulce Mushka, using a possessive construction like French Maître de Puce Mushka, Spanish Maestro de Pulgas Mushka, and Portuguese Mestre das Pulgas Mushka, or using an adjectival equivalent for flea, as in Russian with Blashiny Predvoditel Mushka. The character's name is likely not an accident, as Mushka means little fly in most Slavic languages, and Muska or Moska means fly in most Romance languages. As for the remaining languages, in Korean he's a leader flea, Tanjang Pyoruk Bushuka. In Japanese he's the leader of the flea tribe, Nomizoku no Osa Mushka. And in Chinese, well, in the current translation, he's a traveling group leader, Lü Tuan Tuan Zhang Mu She Ka. But in the older patches, his name was closer to the original, Tiao Zhou Shou Ling. If we venture to the far east of Farloom, we come across a bug who used to belong to an order of badass girl bosses, but has since abandoned that path of life to pursue the art of sewing. We don't have to deal with the gender issue here, as even in English, her title, seamstress, is explicitly feminine. We get a simple direct translation in all European languages, including German Näherin, Italian Sarta, Russian Svea, and the remaining three are cognates, those being French couturière, Spanish costurera, and Portuguese costureira. These words can be contrasted with their masculine counterparts, but with East Asian languages, which have no grammatical gender, there's usually just one word. In Japanese and Korean, we have cognates, saihoshi and chebungsa, while in Chinese, once again, there are two translations. In the older patches, seamstress was referred to as zhi nu cheng, literally a weaver maiden bug, while the new translation is a little more concise, zhi ji, translating to something like weaving maiden. The only other surviving member of the pinstress order can be found on the opposite end of Farloom, and that is, well, pinstress. Unlike seamstress, she remains a warrior, but is also an avid sleeper. Relatable. Both characters' names, at least in English, use the same kind of construction, so I was curious if this similarity was preserved in any of the other languages. And it was, but only in 3. German Nadlerin mirrors Näherin very well, and so does Spanish alfilera compared to costurera, and Chinese zhenzhi compared to zhezi. Several languages used some form of possessive construction, including French maîtresse de la pique, Japanese pin no joketsu, and Korean pineyoin. Others used the word for pin and appended a feminine suffix, like Portuguese alfinistra and Russian bulavashnica. Finally, Italian used the word for pincushion, punta spilli, which itself is a compound evoking an image of something you push pins into. Moving on, let's enter the gloomy grey moor and face the vicious creatures stalking us throughout much of the area. The giant winged mite, Moorwing. You might notice that both the name of the area and the name of the boss share an element. Naturally, I wondered whether this was preserved in the translations. 7 out of 9. In French, Moorwing is a mistwing, El Brume, while in Japanese it's a damp crow, Nuregarasu. The etymology is obfuscated by the phonetic katakana spelling, and this is a common practice in Japanese when writing names of animal or plant species. We've actually seen that before in the Flea Master's Names translation. Some languages went for a direct translation like German Moorflügel, Russian Tapekril, and Korean Hwangya Nalge. Although in the last case we have wilds instead of a moor, since that's what the area was called in Korean. The Spanish translation is the most wordy, Bestialada del Páramo translating to Winged Beast of the Moor, and the Portuguese one is a little shorter, with Asa do Pântano meaning Wing of the Moor. Italian Voliterio combines the verb for to fly and the word for land, and the Chinese translation is the fanciest, as Huangzhao Yizhu means something like Wing Lord of the Desolate Moor. In the middle of Shellwood, there's another boss that barely anyone remembers anymore because it's so easy to skip. But if you're playing for the first time, you will most likely encounter the matriarch of the Splinter tribe, Sister Splinter. Some languages interpreted the word sister as referring to a nun, which I'm pretty sure wasn't the original intention. Hence Japanese Amaeda Modoki and the older Chinese Sui Liezhe Xiu That translation seems to have been fixed with xiu replaced by zhangzi, though in both versions no splinters are mentioned, and the character is referred to as a shatterer. As for the Japanese translation, once again the etymology is hidden behind katakana, but we can uncover it, and this final word, modoki, is a very common Japanese taxonomical ending. It translates to imitation, but basically means that something looks like or acts like something else. The boss isn't literally a branch, but bears resemblance to it. Other languages kept her as a sister, but there's more variability with the splinter part. It's preserved in German Schwestersplitter, Portuguese Irmã Lasca, and Russian Sistra Lucina. In Italian, she's a stick, sorella stecco, in French, a bark stripper, sœur écorceuse, in Korean, a thorn bug, tame kasichung, and Spanish uses a word that can either mean a plant stem or offspring, hermana bastiguera. We now head to Belhart, where, just above the thread-spun town, we can confront the culprit of its haunting, the Crazed Weaver Widow. The name obviously refers to widow spider, so there isn't much to analyze here, except maybe that the Chinese translation Hei Gua Fu specifically refers to a black widow, and the Japanese version is just transliterated from English. Other than that, it's just the word for widow. But let me use this word to elaborate on something I mentioned in the previous video, and that is Spanish and Portuguese stress marking. I said that in both languages the default stress in words ending in vowels is on the second to last syllable, otherwise the stress must be indicated with an accent. However, Portuguese treats I plus a vowel as belonging to separate syllables, while Spanish puts them in one syllable. So a word can be pronounced with the same stress in both languages, but will be spelled differently. Well, then, o que é isso, mano? Vi ou va. Stress on the second to last syllable. Why do we need the accent? Well, you see, the I plus vowel rule doesn't apply when the vowel is U, because I plus U in Portuguese is by default eu. So we need the accent to pronounce it viúva, because without one, this word would be pronounced viúva. Once Belhard is freed, one of the bugs we can talk to is a merchant that goes by the name Relic Seeker Scrounge. I do appreciate that you can sell all relics at once and don't have to hear Velmi Artrid 10 times over. Not that it helps much, because there's like 10 fucking relics in the game. Anyway, there are some interesting translations to look at here. The original name itself comes from a verb meaning to seek things out by asking for them from others rather than working for them, which gets lost in translation when other languages preserve the name as is. Like in German, Relic sucha scrounge, French chercheuse de reliques scrounge, and Spanish buscadora de reliquias scrounge. Though in some versions there is more variation in the first part of the name, including Portuguese relic hunter, caça relíquias scrounge, Japanese relic collector, ibutsu no susu sa scrounge, and Korean relic pursuer, yumul tsuzokta scrounge. There is, however, one version of the name which, despite transcribing scrounge phonetically, is probably one of the coolest translations in the game. In Chinese, the character is named Xunbao Zhe Shi Huangqi, in which the latter word resembles scrounge phonetically, but literally can be understood as scavenger of oddities. This is another example of a phono-semantic matching, as was the case with lace. Except in this case, it's an original translation, not an already existing word, meaning the translators created a phrase which would make sense in Chinese and also describe the character's traits, and at the same time sound like her original name. 10 out of 10 for creativity. In the remaining two languages, the name was altered completely. In Italian, we have cercareperti a raffia, where a raffia comes from the verb arraffare, meaning to grasp or snatch. And in Russian we get Staryovchik kanyuk, in which kanyuk is literally a buzzard, which is a kind of bird, but can also be used to describe someone who pesters others with requests. We must face one final challenge before gaining access to the Citadel, and that is the last judge runback. I'm just kidding, it's nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. Let's talk about the boss herself, or himself? We don't know whether last judge is a he or she in English, but that hasn't stopped other languages from guessing. In most languages, last judge is a she, including Italian ultima judice, French dernier juge, Spanish ultima jueza, Portuguese última juíza, and Russian последняя судья. Only in German is it a guy, letzter Richter, though that's not definitive because again, languages tend to default to masculine in ambiguous contexts. Naturally, in East Asian languages, which have no grammatical gender, this isn't really something we can analyze, as we get neutral names like Japanese Saigo no Simpansa, Korean Majimak Simpan, and Chinese Modai Cai Juezhe. Though in the last case, the word last was interpreted as the last of the judges rather than the last judge before the Citadel, which I'm not sure that was the intention. Anyway, I guess we can move on. Wait a second. Am I really going to get into Portuguese and Spanish stress marking again? Of course I am. So I talked about what happens when I is followed by a vowel in both languages, but the same can be said about U plus a vowel. And again, just like with I followed by U, Portuguese breaks the rule when U is followed by an I, which defaults to ui. Just compare Spanish cuidar and Portuguese cuidar. And so here, once again, although the marked vowel appears to be in the penultimate syllable, meaning it shouldn't need an accent over it, the accent is actually needed to prevent the word from being pronounced juíza. We can finally enter the Citadel and encounter a musical pair of automata located in its very heart, the Cogwork dancers. The Cogwork dancers guard the Cogwork core, and you already know the drill. We analyzed the area in the last video, so is the Cogwork part the same in both cases? Generally yes, except for Russian, which gives us zawodные танцоры, which are wind-up dancers. Most other languages combined whatever word they used for Cogwork core but replaced core with dancers, including German Räderwerkdancer, Spanish bailarines mecánicos, Portuguese dançarinos mecânicos, Chinese jishu wuzhe, Japanese karakuri no butosha, and Korean tumnibakui chumkundel. In East Asian languages, nouns are ambiguous to number and are not required to be pluralized, but Korean is the only one of the three that decided to make the plurality explicit. In Italian and French, the dancers are referred to as a duo, duo meccanico and duo mécanique. Let's also look at their more alive version. Well, one of them is alive at least. Until we kill him. Where was I? Right, Clover dancers. I mostly included them because the German name Kleeblattdancer has 3 T's in a row, which looks kinda crazy. Other languages use similar simple constructions, some including a word for of, like Italian duo del trifoglio, Portuguese dançarinos do trevo, and Japanese kuroba no butosha, and some omitting it, like Chinese sanyetsa wuzhe, and Korean Clover chumkundel. The Chinese word for clover is pretty similar structurally to those found in European languages, literally 3-leaf grass. Russian once again uses an adjectival version of the word clover, resulting in клеверные танцоры. In Spanish, the dancers are 3-leafed, bailarines trifolios, and the French name duo trèfleur combines the word for clover and flower, also referencing the French name for Verdania, Trèflohia. While we're at it, let's look at the names of the other Act 3 bosses. After we defeat his 4 gauntlets, at the peak of the Coral Tower, we fight Crust King Khan. Admittedly, that's not a very flattering title. I mean, it sounds like something you would call a Reddit Janny, so not many languages kept the crust part. The 2 that did are German Küstenkönig Khan and Spanish Rey de la Corteza Khan. In Chinese, he's a Shell King, Kouanka Han. In Japanese, a Coral Shell King, Sangogara no O Khan. And in all other languages, he's a Coral King. Those include Recorallo Khan in Italian, Roi Corai Khan in French, Hei Corau Khan in Portuguese, Sanoe Wan Khan in Korean, and Karalovi Karol Han in Russian. Except in the Russian description of the encrusted heart, his name is transcribed Khan, which is inconsistent. And this is why I hate the sequence KH, because English loves using it to transcribe H in romanizations, even though no language actually uses this digraph, except for like Vietnamese. Whatever, I'm not going on another rant about bad romanizations. But if you want proof that this digraph causes confusion, this is exhibit number 1. Another old heart holder is hidden in a shrine adjacent to the grand entrance to the citadel. Once we defeat the shrine's guardian, we can enter the memory of the Heart of Shellwood, Nyleth. There's not much to look at here since it's just a name, so it was kept as is in almost all languages, though some of the phonetic transcriptions are odd to say the least. In Chinese we get Nyleth, and in Japanese, Nyuresu. I'm not sure what languages these pronunciations are trying to resemble. I think it's just supposed to be pronounced like in English. Korean Nairesu comes closer, though for some reason the L is transcribed as an R instead of the expected Nailesu, which is not the only time that happens in the Korean version of the game. Apart from that, the only unusual translation is French fleurinelle, which obviously evokes a floral image.
Such a bad bitch though.
And finally we meet the fan favorite. Let's talk about the Ant Queen Skarr singer Carmelita. There's one language which gave up on translating this name altogether and just transcribed the English version phonetically, and that is Korean's Skarr carmelita. Other languages either combine Skarr with a word for singer into one compound, including German Skarsängerin Carmelita, Portuguese Skarrcantora Carmelita, and Chinese Skarr Gehou Carmelita, or used Skarr as a quasi-adjective, like French chanteuse Skarr Carmelita and Spanish Carmelita la cantante Skarr. In Italian, the whole tribe of Skarr was renamed to Myrmede, which comes from the ancient Greek word for ants, and this is reflected in Carmelita's name as well. Myrmede cantante Carmelita. Russian, like Italian, calls her a singing Skarr. Carmelita poющая Skarru, where Skarru is likely a feminine form of Skarr. The Japanese translation is rather prosaic, but notice how R is transcribed inconsistently in both cases it appears. Skarru no utaite kamerita. Carmelita is transcribed as if it was an English word, replacing the R with a long vowel. But Skarr retains it in the translation. My theory is that it's because Skarr is spelled with two R's, so it must be a different phoneme than the single R in Carmelita. But then Gur the Outcast is transcribed with two D's, so that doesn't make sense. If only the creators put even a fraction of the effort that went into the game's incredibly vast and compelling world building into its linguistic landscape, instead of settling for incongruent gibberish and cute soundbites, we could have gotten an answer. I can only wish. Not far from where we meet Carmelita is the cave in which our next character can be encountered, and that is Sprintmaster Swift. In the Hollow Knight Grim Troop DLC, a new charm was added to the game. Its name? Sprintmaster. You already know what I'm about to ask. Is the Hollow Knight Sprintmaster the same as the Silksong Sprintmaster in all languages? No, there's one where it's different. In German, the Sprintmaster charm is called Laufmeister, while the NPC in Silksong is called Sprintmeister Swift. In other languages, it's consistent, and there are various fun ways in which the name was translated. Now, the Asian languages kept Swift as is, as in Chinese, 飞毛腿思维福特, where he's a fast runner, which sounds boring until you realize that fast runner is literally flying hair leg. Japanese kenkyaku no shi swifto, in which the word for a good walker is literally healthy leg, and Korean chulchu mastho swipte, which unfortunately isn't as goofy. The European languages weren't as creative in translating the Sprintmaster part, but changed Swift to native-sounding names that make more sense in their respective languages. Actually, the name Swift in and of itself is very clever because apart from its obvious adjectival meaning, a swift is also a type of reel used to hold yarn, which is very much in tune with the theme of the game. The Italian equivalent Maestro della Corsa Aspo uses a similar strategy, since Aspo is pretty much the same thing, but kind of spool. French Maître de la Vitesse Vif makes use of an adjective meaning agile or quick-witted, while Spanish Maestro de Sprints Veloz and Portuguese Mestre da Corrida Veloz simply use the adjective meaning swift. Finally, the Russian name Lovkach Bystronok uses the word for an agile person to translate Sprintmaster, while swift is rendered as Bystronok, which means quickfoot. Let's move to the deep docks to meet our next fiery duo, Four Brothers Signis and Gron. The term Four Brothers could be understood in two ways, either as a variation on forefathers, meaning ancestors, or brothers who are foremen, which is what their Hunter's Journal entry would suggest. Some languages use the first meaning and others the second. German Vorbrüder Signis und Gron is equally ambiguous as the original, and so is Russian Starshye Bratya Signis и Gron. The adjective here can either mean elder or chief. French went with the ancestor route, giving us Frère Précurseur Signis et Gron, and Japanese just circumvented the issue by naming them harbor brothers, since deep docks in Japanese are deep harbors, resulting in Minato no Kyodai Signis and gron. Other languages call them bosses or overseers, including Spanish Hermanos Mayores Signis y Gron, Portuguese Arqui-Irmãos Signis y Gron, Chinese Jiangong-Xiongdi Signis he Gelong, and Korean Kamdokwan Hyongjedil Signis와 Gron. Italian was the only language where the translators felt the need to change their names, giving us Capofratelli Brace e Torbo, where brace means ember and torbo is likely the word torba meaning peat turned masculine. Another boss I want to take a look at is found in Sinner's Road, and is given a rather unflattering name, Disgraced Chef Lugoli. Why is it that the Disgraced Chef has an Italian name? Italians are good at making food. It should be like Disgraced Chef Oliver. Anyway, this is another one of the characters whose gender is not specified in the game, but that hasn't stopped translators from having their guesses. The only language, apart from the generally gender-neutral East Asian languages, which made an effort to preserve this ambiguity is Italian, where Esule Chef Lugoli makes use of an adjective which has the same form whether it's masculine or feminine. German and French are the only languages where this character is specifically masculine, Inungna de Gefallena Koch Lugoli in German and Chef Déshonoré Lugoli in French. In the other European languages, Lugoli is a she, including Spanish Lugoli Chef Caída en Desgracia and Portuguese Chef Desacreditada Lugoli, in which, although the word chef is neutral, the participles that follow it are explicitly feminine. And Russian is the only language which uses a specifically feminine word for chef, Apalnaya Pavariha Lugoli. The Asian languages, as mentioned before, have a much easier time keeping it neutral, as in Chinese, 是个大厨Lugoli, which uses an epithet literally meaning disqualified, but it also can describe someone who has lost face or fallen into public disgrace. Japanese kegareta chorisi Lugoli and Korean pulmyeongye yorisa Lugoli, which once again transcribes an L as an R, instead of the expected Lugoli. You couldn't have an L at the beginning of a word because in Korean, L can only appear at the end of a syllable or when doubled, and is otherwise pronounced as R. On top of Mount Fay, we can meet our next character, the mysterious avian Fayforn. Let's start with the boring ones, the languages which didn't translate the name at all. Those being Russian Fayforn, Japanese Fayforun, and Korean Paypon, which, due to Korean lacking the sound F, sounds exactly the same as payphone. Spanish just stuck an O at the end, Fayforno, I guess to make it look more Spanish, and German, well, the German name doesn't exist. The only place this character is explicitly named in the game is in the description of the Fay-down cloak, which says that it's lined with the soft down of a Fayforn. But the German translation just rephrases the sentence so the name of the creature is never actually mentioned. Languages that changed the name completely include Italian, where piumagico uses the word for plumage and combines it with the word magical, because fey, fairy, magic, you get the idea. French fené is probably related to cornet, meaning crow, and Portuguese plumígio, which, much like Italian, references plumage. Chinese has changed its translation of this name. It used to be Huanyu Huang'e, phantom feather bright moth, which may not make a lot of sense lore-wise, but sounds metal as fuck. And it was changed to 雪岭之祖, snow spirit ancestor. It's cool that it matches the new Chinese name for Mount Fay compared to the old phonetic one, but it just doesn't hit the same. Let's finish off by going back to the Citadel. One character we can meet there is everyone's favorite theater kid, Trobio! And I know what you're thinking. It's just a name. I mean, it's literally named after a real person. There's no way they could have bastardized it. I mean, you don't go to, like, Spain to read about Enrique Ceramista. Well, Guess which language felt the need to change Trobio, the most Italian-sounding name imaginable, into something completely different? That's right, Italian. Ma che cazzo? But what the hell is farfletto? It looks like the combination of farfalla, meaning butterfly, which is what Trobio is, and fletto, an archaic word for crying, which is what Trobio does. It's also possible that the name is supposed to resemble Amleto, the Italian version of Hamlet, because, you know, theater. Truly psychotic translation. After finding the Surgeon's Key in White Ward, we gain access to this thing named the Unraveled. In 3 languages, this name is actually pluralized, and before I learned that, I had no idea that this boss is supposed to be some form of hive mind. I probably would have known if I had read any lore, but I choose to blame English, where neither articles nor adjectives inflect neither for gender nor for number. In Spanish, we have los desentrañados, which is similar in meaning to the original, and so is German der Aufgelöste, although this one is singular. But then French les tissés means kind of the opposite. Russian also reversed the meaning, but in another way, giving a sense of agency to the name, as распутыватель translates to the unraveler rather than the unraveled. Meanwhile, Portuguese and Italian went with a different route. Sepulcro de seda, meaning sepulchre of silk, and i rimasuglii, simply meaning the remnants. Korean and Japanese made use of agentive suffixes, Korean pulyonanja translating to something like the released one, or once, since, as mentioned earlier, nouns in East Asian languages are ambiguous to number. Same for Japanese ito tokaresimono, which also uses a classical form of the past participle, making it sound much cooler. Chinese once again has an old translation and a new translation. The boss is currently referred to as Shifu Yuanhuan, unbound vengeful spirit, but used to be called Sanjian Huanyan, scattered cocoon soul abyss. And let's finish with the main villainess of the game, Grandmother Silk. It's a little anticlimactic, but most languages went with a direct translation, including German Große Mutter Seide, Italian Grande Madreseta, Spanish Gran Madre Seda, and Portuguese Grande Mãe Seda. In Russian, unlike in the other European languages, the word for silk is masculine, so it doesn't really work as a name for Farloom's ruler. Верховная Mater Sholka uses the genitive form of silk, so the whole name comes out as something like Supreme Mother of Silk, and also uses an archaic word for mother, making it sound more grand. The French name is Mère Supérieure Soit, using a term literally meaning superior mother, but it also means Mother Superior, which is a leader of a convent of nuns, tying into the religious theme of the game. Japanese and Korean didn't use native words for silk, but borrowed the English word, which likely sounds better in the context of a person's name, resulting in O inaru haha silku in Japanese and Widehan omoni silku in Korean. This is also another name which was updated in the Chinese translation. The old name was Zangbai Zhimu, meaning simply pale mother, so the translators gave themselves a lot of creative liberty. It was later changed to the much fancier Chonggao Shengmu Lingsi, combining the word for supreme with Shengmu, which character by character means holy mother, but can be used to refer to a female deity. Lingsi is literally soul silk, and that's what silk is referred to as in Chinese everywhere throughout the game, since just saying silk by itself probably sounds too prosaic in Chinese. Okay, I lied. There's of course one more. How can you forget about the final boss of the game? We've already covered Lace, but in Act 3 she decides to do blackface and hide in her mother's basement, or something. I'm not sure about the lore. And as it turns out, when she loses herself, the translations of her name become a little more interesting. Let's start off with the unremarkable direct translations, which would be German Verlorene Lace, Italian Merletta Perduta, Spanish Lace Perdida, Portuguese Tessella Perdida, and Russian Prapasya Lace. French Lace Déchu uses a word which can mean dethroned, but also fallen, as in a fallen angel. The Asian languages were a little more creative. In Chinese, we have Shi Xin Lei Si, Lace who has lost her mind. In Korean, she has fallen into madness, Kwangye Bajin Deisu, and in Japanese, she's pitch black, Shikoku no Reisu. And with that, we can conclude our second journey across Farloom. We've met many characters and learned their various names, some boring, some cool, and some questionable. I hope you enjoyed this wild ride and found it at least somewhat informative. And if you didn't, I hope Jubilana steals your fucking whiteboard key.